All right. Let's get started. Um, I um this is part 7 of our ongoing series on the third chapter in Sukkah. We're going to be on pages 34a and 34b. And we are continuing to define what an arava is, what the willow branch is that needs to go in the lulav. So Bright says, Tana Rabbanan, Arvei Nachal, Hagdelot al Hanachal. Right. So the pasuk that told us to take these 4 species described the one that we're interested in here as Arvei Nachal, the willows of the Nachal. A Nachal is a wadi, or a stream or a small river. So these are the willows of the Nachal. So the Gemara says that the Breita says that means that they're willows that grow next to a stream. Prat l'tzaftzfa hagdelam ben harim, which is to distinguish it from the tzaftzfa, which is a related tree that grows in the mountains. Amar Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says, "My kra." So what is the verse? This seems to be in what verse tells us that you can't use a tzafzafa as an arava, which is a little bit of a strange question because we just derived that from a verse in a Breita, and Rabbi Zera is an Amora, so he should know that already. Excuse me. But I think the point here is that Rabbi Zera wants to introduce a different verse. So he says, Kacha mayim rabim tzaftzfa shemo. So we actually kind of need the beginning of the pasuk here for this. This is starting in the middle. We're in Yechezkel 17. Right? 1 second. Okay. Vaikach mizera haaretz, vaitnehu bisdei zara. So the first half says, and he took from the seeds of the land, and he put it in a field of seeds, or possibly a fertile field. Kach al mayim rabim, which really, properly speaking, should mean take something from on the many waters. But the interpretations that I saw all seem to be interpreting kach as a past tense verb, even though it sure as heck looks like a tzivui to me. But I'm going to go with that because that's what everyone else seems to think it means. So it was taken on the many waters. Tzaftzfash samo. It was put, a tzaftzfa was put, or it was put as a tzaftzfa. Okay, so somehow the some kind of seeds were planted, and then something was done next to many waters, and then something was put on or in or instead of a tzaftzfa, whatever that is. Okay, that's clear as mud, as they say. So Rabbi Zera seems to think that the tzaftzfa samo is meant to be read as a contrast to kach al mayim rabim. So whatever it is that tzaftzfa is, it's something that's not associated with water. Therefore, if our tree that we need is something associated with water, it must be that it's not the tzaftzfa. So Amar li Abaye. Abaye says to Rabbi Zera, "V'dilma perusha kamefarish." He says, "Well, this is difficult to interpret, but maybe the interpretation should be kach al mayim rabim umayninhu tzaftzfa." Maybe we should read the first part of what you read, as put it on many waters. We should read that as being parallel to or explained by tzaftzfa samo. Right, that put it as a tzaftzfa means the same thing as, or is an interpretation of, put it on many waters, in which case the tzaftzfa is something that's associated with lots of water, and it should be the same thing as what we're looking for, the willow that grows by the stream. So either Rabbi Zera responds, or possibly the narrator responds, Im kain my sam. Right? If in fact Safzifa is just an interpretation of something that grows next, that is put by many waters, in that case, why do we need a new verb? Why does it say it is placed? That's not the best argument in the world. We have parallel structures that have verbs in both halves all over Tanakh, but apparently it seems to satisfy the Gemara here. Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu has an interpretation, it would seem, of the whole structure. He says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Ani amarti sheyu Yisrael lefanai kekach amayim rabim. I said that Israel should be in front of me like something which is put by many waters. I wanted to place you in a place where there's plenty of water, where it's very fertile. I wanted to make you like a plant that grows next to all the water. Umay nihu, and what's that? And arava, the willow. This presumably is meant to present being compared to a willow as a positive thing, which if you're aware of the midrash, which is not brought here, but the midrash that everybody gets taught in day school about how the arba minim are the thing that has taste and smell, the thing that has taste but not smell, the thing that has smell but not taste, and the thing that has nothing, right? So there's Jews with Torah and mitzvot, and Jews with mitzvot but no Torah, Jews with Torah but no mitzvot, and then there are Jews with nothing. So the nothing example in that structure is usually the willow, because it doesn't produce anything that you can eat and it doesn't smell terribly interesting. That presents the willow as a very negative image. I don't think that's what this is doing. I think this is meant to present the willow as a very positive image of fertility and comfort, and it always has plenty of what it needs because it grows right next to its water source. I think that's supposed to be a positive image. In any case, God wanted to make us like willows, but they insisted on going and putting themselves in the mountains like the tzaftzafah, meaning God provided us with everything we needed, and we went somewhere else where we didn't have what we needed because we didn't cooperate or because we didn't understand. In which case, on the one hand, now we understand that Rabbi Abahu seems to be presenting the first and second halves as being in contrast. Certainly the tzaftzafah is being presented as not growing next to the water. That's not, the pasuk is, a prophecy about the children of Israel not appreciating God, but at the same time, it seems to be also presenting the tzaftzafah as not a willow tree, which would support Rabbi Zera, sort of from the back end, it would support Rabbi Zera's assertion that that's what this pasuk says. Makifle Rabbi Zera, but Rabbi Zera objected to it. Vidilma, which is weird because Rabbi Zera is the one who originally proposed the interpretation. Vidilma Perushika Mefarish, Kacha Mayim Rabim Maynihu Tzafzafa. So we're now seem to be quoting an alternative version in which Rabbi Abahu makes the argument that tzafzafa is not a willow, and Rabbi Zera makes the argument that we had in the first version made by Abaye, that maybe the tzafzafa is explaining what it is that lives next to water. And again, we have the same deferral of that argument that we had last time. Inke mai samo. In that case, why do I have a second verb if it's just giving an example in the second half of what the first half is talking about? And now we have exactly the same thing again. I don't know if it means that I made a copying error or if the Gemara made a copying error. I think it's meant to be here. So we'll read it again. Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ani Amarti Sheyu Yisrael Lefanai Kacha Mayim Rabim. So Rabbi Abahu said, God said, I said Israel should be in front of me like something that grows next to lots of water. Umaynihu Arava, and that's the willow. And they put themselves in the mountains like a tzaftzaf. Okay, I like I said, that is exactly the same as the piece before it. I don't know whether that means I made a copying error or a copyist 800 years ago made a copying error, but I don't know. I could check, but not right this minute. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. So the Breita wants to know, okay, so I know that I can use an arava for my lulav, and I know I can't use a tzaftzava, but granted that I've got a branch in front of me, how do I tell the difference? What do they look like? Arava kaneh shela adom, and the arava has a red stem. The aleh shela mashuch, and its leaf is long, it's stretched out. Upia chalak, and the edge of the leaf, right? Piha means its mouth, but I think this is by analogy to the thing described as the mouth of a sword, which is the side edge. That right, that's biblical already, that usage. I think that's what this means. So the side edge of the leaf is chalak, it's smooth. Tzaftzava, kaneshel alavan, the tzaftzava has a white stem, the aleshla agul, and it has rounded leaves. Upia domela magal, and it has an edge which is like a sickle, which seems to mean serrated. But that's a problem because v'hatanya domela magal kasher domela masar pasul. We have a Breita that teaches that if the leaves of your arava are like a sickle, that's actually kosher. But if it's like a saw, that's not valid. So if the tzaftzava is the kind of willow that's not valid, it should also have the description that is of the plant that's not valid. So it's a little odd that they're both being described here as being like a sickle. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, Kitanya hahi bechalifa gila. So Abaye says that Breita, the second one, the one that says that it's okay if it's like a sickle, but not okay if it is like a saw, that's about the chilfa gila, which would mean, by the way, that we stand by our original description of what a tzaftzava is. A tzaftzava, which is in fact not valid, has a white stem. It has rounded leaves, and it has leaves that are serrated, similar to a sickle. However, the Breita is telling us, but there's a different kind of willow, which is valid. It's kosher if it has leaves that are serrated like a sickle, as long as it doesn't have leaves that are serrated like a saw, which I don't know how those serrations are different. Perhaps they're deeper or sharper or different shape. I don't know. And that would be called the chilfa gila. Amar Abaye, shma mina hai chilfa gila kasher lahoshana. And Rabbi says, and we can conclude from this that the chilfa gila is in fact a kosher form of willow to put in a lulav. The Gemara says pshita. Well, that's obvious. Of course, the chilfa gila is kosher. Oh, well, what might you have thought? Oh, il ve'it le'shem levai. I would have thought that since it has a different name, it's not called a willow, an arava. It's called a chilfa gila, whatever that is. Alonit kasher. Therefore, it's not kosher. Maybe not only does it have to have a red stem, and not only does it have to have long leaves, and not only does it have the either relatively or absolutely not serrated leaves, and not only does it have to grow next to the water, but maybe it also has to be called a willow, right? Like that could very plausibly be a requirement. But so Kamash Milan, this Breita is teaching us that that's not the case. As long as it meets all of the structural and ordinary requirements for a willow, it's a willow, even if we call it something else. On the other hand, wait a minute, stop there. Maybe that's a good argument. Maybe we should invalidate the chilfa gila because it has a different name. No, we're not going to do that because Arve Nachal, and this is what we've been doing with these words, willows of the stream, that since we first began talking about willows, we've been circling back repeatedly to the fact that the word arve, willows, is plural. And repeatedly we have concluded arve nachal amar rachmana mikol makom. God said that they're the willows, plural, of the stream, and so any kind of willow that's by the stream will do. Right? That's meant to be expansive. It's meant to include anything that could be a willow of the stream. We're not being picky. Okay. Amar Rav Chisda, Hani tzlat mili ishtene shmaihu michi charav beit hamikdash. Okay, so Rav Chisda says, while we're on the subject, there are three things whose names have changed since the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Okay, Rav Chisda is living a couple hundred years after the Beit HaMikdash. He's living in Babylonia. It's a different place, different language, different time period. But his, right, being Jewish, our marker is always, before and after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so he says, Chalafta arvita, arvita chalafta. Says the words chalafta and arvita have switched places. A chalafta is now called a willow, and a willow is now called a chalafta. My nafkamina. So Gemara says, who cares? What difference does it make what words we call these things? It matters lilulav, for a lulav, meaning the thing that used to be called a willow that was kosher for your lulav is now called a chalafta, and you have to know that even though the name is wrong, that's now the right thing for your lulav because the name changed. Okay. The next thing on his list is shipura chatzotzarta and chatzotzarta shipura. He says a shofar is now called a trumpet, and a trumpet is now called a shofar. Again, my nafkaminas, who cares? Le shofar shel Rosh Hashanah. So it matters for the shofar of Rosh Hashanah that apparently in Rav Chisda's time and place, they were calling a animal horn that's kosher as a shofar. They called that a trumpet, and a metal man-made object that's not kosher for a shofar, they called that shofar. And you need to know that that's not the original vocabulary. So when we say shofar for Rosh Hashanah, we mean the kind that's made from an animal. Okay. Patorta pitura, pitura patorta. So a patorta is now a patora, and a patora is now a patorta. Jastro thinks these are either different small and large tables or possibly small and large dishes. But either way, they're smaller and larger versions of the same object. So again, the Gemara says, well, who cares? And the answer, and this is always kind of a cheat answer when it comes to vocabulary, is the mekach umemkar, right? If I say I want to buy a patorta, you need to know which thing that is in order to sell me the right one. It's not clear to me that we needed a legal source for that. It seems to me that we're always going to need to inquire what the local usage is anyway. But that's kind of our last resort when we want to know why words matter. Amar Abaye, Afani Omer, Bekase Hovlila Bekase. And Abaye said, I want to add another. That's not just those three. There's a fourth pair of vocabulary words that have switched places, and that is that the Bekase and the Hovlila have now switched names. One of them used to be the first stomach on a ruminant animal, and the other was the second stomach, and now they are the second stomach and the first stomach, respectively. So again, the Gemara says the Mainafkamina, so who cares? Not necessarily who cares what you call a first stomach and a second stomach, but who cares that the vocabulary word switched. And he says, because if you have a needle which is found partially stuck into the thick wall of the bekase, then that does not make the animal a treif. So we've mentioned this before, although I think possibly not recently. There is a list of injuries to an animal that would make the animal not kosher, even if it is properly shechted, because the theory, or at least the formality, is that the animal was already dying anyway because it had this injury. And that list of injuries is taken to be a formalized list, meaning things that are on the list are considered that kind of injury, and things that are not on the list are not considered that way. It doesn't it doesn't seem to be related to actually how serious the injury is. What matters is whether it's on the list or not. This is not me talking. The Rambam says this. He says there are more serious injuries than the ones on this list that don't make the animal a treifa, and some of these injuries are not especially dangerous. But what we have is a list, and that's the list that the Torah says makes it not a kosher animal. In any case, on that list in the Mishnah in Chulin, I think it's in the Mishnah. If not, it would be in a Braita. It says that if you have a needle which is partly stuck into the wall of the thicker wall of the bekasa, then as long as the needle doesn't go all the way through, the animal is still kosher. Apparently, this was I have had very little contact with actual goats in my life, but apparently goats, it's not only a stereotype, they will in fact swallow all kinds of things that are not good for them. And sometimes you check them and you cut them open and you find stuff in their digestive system that was not supposed to be there and that is dangerous to them, including apparently sometimes small metal tools that they pick up from the ground and swallow. So it matters whether you have the first stomach or the second stomach, or more precisely, it matters whether you have a stomach that you can call a beikasi or not, because if the needle is stuck into the wall of the stomach that the Mishnah referred to as the beikasi, then your goat might still be kosher. But if your needle is stuck into one of the other stomachs, then your goat's not kosher. So it's important to know that the vocabulary shifted, because that way you can know what the correct vocabulary was in the time of the Mishnah, and you can properly interpret which stomach it is, that your goat might still be kosher even if it has a needle in its stomach. Okay. Amar of Bar Yosef. Rabbi Bar Yosef also has another pair of words he'd like to add. Afani Omer Bavel Borsif Bavel. He says there are two towns. I think these are both in Babylonia, although I did not check. So if I'm wrong about where Borsif is, someone can correct me. But the town called Bavel is now called Borsif, and the town called Borsif is now called Bavel. That actually seems like a bigger deal to me than most of these other vocabulary changes. Changing the names of locations seems like a bigger cultural deal, but okay. In any case, Lamai Nafkamina, the Gemara wants to know what difference it makes. Like, why is the legal issue that the city changed names? Legite Nashim, because for a divorce document needs to have a date and a location written on it, and the location needs to be correct, right? You need to put the correct and the traditional name for the location where you are in order to have a divorce. You might ask, well, in that case, when a Jewish community moves to a new place, how do they have a traditional name for it? And that's a really good question. We've got lots of traditional names for lots of places in North America where there have only been Jews for a few hundred years. I don't really know how that starts, but once it starts, we're very particular about continuing to call places by the same name in our divorce documents. My husband likes to talk about the community in the southern United. Well, you need to name the river that runs through the city where your document is being written. So I don't actually know where the location is that I'm talking about. My husband likes to talk about a place where the tradition is to spell the name of the Mississippi River, Mem Yud Samach Samach Yud Samach Samach Yud Pei Pei Yud, which makes no sense at all in Hebrew. It makes sense only if you only know how to spell in English. But once that becomes the traditional spelling, it's the traditional spelling, and that's what you've got. So here, it matters what the original name was of these towns, so that you can write your divorce documents using the traditional, old-fashioned original name for the town. Okay. New Mishnah. Matizin. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Shlosha Hadasim Ushte Aravot, Lulav Echad Ve'etrog Echad. Rabbi Yishmael says, and this should sound familiar because this is the way we practice, that your arba minim need to have 3 myrtles, 2 willows, 1 lulav, and 1 etrog. Afilu, I forgot to mention at the beginning that Harvey did some research for us, and with reference to last week's shiur, apparently myrtle berries are in fact edible and can be used for flavoring as a spice. So thank you, that's really cool. So I still don't have any particular plans to make my invalid myrtle branches valid by chewing on the berries on Yom Tov. But if it comes up, at least I'll know that they're not poisonous. Okay. So Rabbi Yishmael had given us these numbers, and he says, "Afilu shnayim ktumim ve'echad eno katan," which is weird. Rabbi Yishmael is quoted as saying, "This is not the law." In fact, the Gemara is going to claim that even Rabbi Yishmael didn't really mean it. That up to 2 of the myrtles can have their ends broken off, as long as one of them is intact. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, afilu shloshtan ktumim. Rabbi Tarfon says actually all 3 of the myrtles can have their ends broken off. Rabbi Akiva Omer, kashem shelulav echad ve'etrog echad kach hadas echad v'aravach. Rabbi Akiva says, nope, you only need 1 of each species, 1 lulav, 1 etrog, and similarly 1 myrtle and 1 willow. Okay, that is not the way we practice. Gemara. Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer creates hadar echad. So we have a braita here which is purporting to derive how Rabbi Yishmael got his numbers. So the pre-eitz hadar, the fruit of the beautiful tree, that's the reference in the pasuk to the etrog. A pre is a singular, so it's one fruit. Kapot tmarim echad. So this is a little weird because the word kapot actually is, the way we pronounce it, is a plural. It's, branches of dates, but it's spelled chaser. It's spelled without a vav, and I think we have already once in this chapter seen the Gemara claim that because it's spelled without a vav, it's to be treated as a singular. If not, we haven't seen it yet. This is certainly saying that here, that we're going to interpret it as if it said kapat tmarim, right? A branch of dates, as opposed to branches of dates. So again, that would be echad, 1. Anaf eitz avot shlosha, a branch of a thick tree. That's going to be 3 in one of 2 ways. Rashi seems to say that anaf eitz avot has 3 words in it, and that means that you have 3 branches because there are 3 words. Steinsaltz seems to say that the idea of being a thick tree, that must mean that your foliage is thick, and in order to get thick foliage, you need at least 3 branches next to each other. So that must mean we need 3 branches. I would say that neither of those is the clearest explanation, but somehow Rabbi Yishmael is getting the number 3 out of the words anaf eitz avot. And arvei nachal, as we saw before, when we were saying that it was meant to be expansive about species, arvei is plural, arvei nachal, the willows of the stream, so plural means at least 2. Ve'afilu shnayim ktumim ve'echad sheino katum. And this is now quoting the same thing we said Rabbi Yishmael said in the Mishnah, which is that up to 2 of the myrtle branches can have their ends broken off. Rabbi Tarfon Omer shloshav afilu shloshtan ktumim. And Rabbi Tarfon says you can even break the ends off of all 3 myrtle branches. Rabbi Akiva Omer, this is clearly just an expanded version of our Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva Omer, kashem shulav echad ve'etrog echad kach hadas echad v'arava echad. Rabbi Akiva says just like there's only 1 lulav and only 1 etrog, there's also only 1 myrtle and only 1 willow. I'm really Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer said back, presumably to Rabbi Akiva, he said, maybe if we're going to consider these things all to be the same, so maybe the etrog belongs in the bundle with the branches. Amarta v'chi ne'amar creates hadar v'kapat tmarim. So I think it's not so much that Rabbi Akiva responded this way as that we are recommending that someone could respond to this challenge in this way, which is, does it say that it's a pre-Eitz Hadar, a beautiful, the fruit of a beautiful tree, and the branch of dates? The halolo namar ela kapot, but in fact it doesn't. There's no and there. So let me just get back to the citation, so I can let me read you the pasuk. It's Vayikra 23:40. Last week's parsha, I believe. There we are. Right, ulekachtem lachem b'yom harishon. You will take for yourselves on the first day. Pre-Eitz Hadar, the fruit of a beautiful tree. Kapot tamarim. There's no and. A branch of dates. Va'anaf eitz avot, and a branch of a thick tree. Va'arvei nachal, and the willows of the stream. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim, and you will celebrate in front of Hashem your God for 7 days. Okay, so in fact, it seems to be that we have item number 1 and then items 2, 3, and 4. So it makes sense to bundle items 2, 3, and 4 together in a bundle and leave item 1 separate, which is the etrog. So how do we know that each of these plants is necessary and that you can't do the mitzvah of any of them unless you have all of them? That's what ma'akev means. Talmud lomar ulekachtem. That's why it says, and you will take. Shetehei likichatam. It must be a complete taking, meaning you have to pick up all 4 of them at the same time. Rabbi Yishmael manavshach. So now we're addressing Rabbi Yishmael, presumably not directly. Rabbi Yishmael is long gone by the time the Gemara is being written, but we're addressing his idea, right? Rabbi Yishmael, look, this doesn't make sense. You can't make that distinction. If, because remember, Rabbi Yishmael said that up to 2 out of 3 of the myrtles could be broken. We say to him, if there need to be whole, then they should all need to be whole. And if they don't need to be whole, you shouldn't even need one that's whole. Amar Beira'a, Amar Ami, Chazar Bo Rabbi Yishmael. So Beira'a, whoever he is, he's a sage, but I don't know if this is the only place he's quoted, but he's certainly not a common fellow, said in the name of Rabbi Ami that Rabbi Yishmael recanted. Apparently, even Rabbi Yishmael didn't really think that you could have up to 2 myrtles that are broken. On the other hand, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, right? Rav Yehuda was a student of Rav, and then when Rav died, he became a student of Shmuel. He quotes both of them extensively. I think he's actually the main source for our knowledge of the opinions of both men. In any case, so he said that Shmuel said halachak Rabbi Tarfon, that the law is actually like Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said that all of your myrtle branches can have the ends broken off. And Shmuel was consistent, although we'll see that he's not exactly consistent. He doesn't actually seem to always believe that we should practice like Rabbi Tarfon, although he may always believe that the law follows Rabbi Tarfon. The Amar Lahu Shmuel Lahanhu the Mizavni Asa. So Shmuel said to a bunch of myrtle sellers, these are people who are selling myrtles presumably for use on Sukkot, Ashvu vizabinu v'ilo darshina lechu Rabbi Tarfon. He says you have to keep the price consistent, and if not, I am going to tell everybody that the price is like that the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon. So presumably Shmuel wouldn't have said that unless he thought it was okay to practice like Rabbi Tarfon. On the other hand, he also wouldn't have said it if everybody was already practicing like Rabbi Tarfon. Right? So you have to at least have a situation in which the presumption of the community is that it's better to have unbroken myrtles, and that Shmuel is in general perfectly happy to let people go along in that way. But Shmuel's willing to let people even pay something of a premium for unbroken myrtles, but he's not willing to let them pay an excessive premium for the unbroken myrtles. And if the myrtle people are charging too much for the myrtles that are whole, then Shmuel is threatening that he'll just tell everybody they don't need to be whole, and people will, first of all, that will greatly increase the supply, because if you don't need whole ones, you can buy all the broken ones. And second of all, it might even be that you can buy one and break it into 3 pieces. Like, I don't know exactly how long the myrtles are that people are selling, but that would also presumably drive the prices back down. In any case, my Tama. So what is why does Shmuel threaten the myrtle sellers with Rabbi Tarfon's position? If you can't really say that he's threatening them with the most lenient position in the Mishnah, in that case, he could threaten it to rule like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva said you only need one myrtle. So you could have expected it to answer, well, he threatened them to rule like Rabbi Tarfon because he thinks Rabbi Tarfon is right. But that's oddly not the answer. The answer is Plata ketume shchiche, chad lo katum lo shchiche. Chad vil lo katum lo shchiche. He said the answer is that, in fact, requiring 3 myrtles but allowing them to be broken is more lenient than requiring 1 myrtle and requiring it to be whole, because apparently there are a lot of broken pieces of myrtle all over the place, and getting 3 broken pieces is easier and cheaper than getting 1 unbroken piece. So in fact, Rabbi Tarfon's position is more lenient than Rabbi Akiva's. Now, in order for this end bit of the Gemara to make sense, Shmuel has to have kind of thought it didn't matter that much who you rule like in the Mishnah, that any of these positions would be fine, and he's just choosing the most lenient. Or alternatively, maybe he doesn't have any plans to actually rule like any of these positions, and it's an empty threat. And he's using the position in the Mishnah that he thinks will be most upsetting to the sellers, but since he doesn't have any plans to actually follow through on his threat, it doesn't make any difference what he threatens them with, as long as it's something that gets them to lower the prices. I think it is interesting that to see this in context of Rabbi Tarfon's relationship with the marketplace in general. I don't know if you remember, but last year or the year before, when we were learning the 4th chapter of Baba Metzia, there was a scene in which Rabbi Tarfon had he allowed you to overcharge by more if you were a merchant, but he also gave the buyer a longer period of time in which to come back and demand their money back if you charge too much. And the merchants, they liked the first part, but they hated the second part so much that they fired him as their rabbi, and they went back to the position of all the other rabbis, so that they had to be more precise in getting the price right, but the time period for complaining was shorter. So it may also be that because Rabbi Tarfon had this relationship with merchants, that Rabbi Tarfon's position was known to them, and that was a reasonable thing to threaten them with, because Rabbi Tarfon was, the economics rabbi. I don't actually know, but it would be interesting to examine that. In any case, that is what I have for the evening. Are there questions? Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. Next week there is a shul membership meeting, and the week after that is Shavuot on Monday night. And so we're not going to have class either of those two. The share has now gotten to the place where it's consistently interfering with Minyan also. And my inclination is just to stop for the year now and restart in the fall. So I think that's what we're going to do. Um, which I would have liked to get a little further, but we're definitely not going to finish the chapter either way. We've got about 8 pages left, so that's not going to happen. Um, okay, I'm sorry. Are there questions? Okay. So I hope I'll see you guys at the show meeting next Monday night. And then we will reconvene class sometime end of August, beginning of September. I will figure out a date and let you guys know. Thank you
Thank
very much
you.
for another great year of learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.